A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Here's what's coming up this hour. 2 children are rescued from a cable car dangling above a river in Pakistan. "18 bodies are found in a forested area of northern Greece following wildfires there recently. Plus, the African Union announces its suspension of Niger until civilian rule is restored. Thank you for joining us on The World today. And we're keeping up with a developing story out of Pakistan. Rescuers are trying to save 8 people, 6 children and 2 adults trapped in a cable car dangling above a ravine. 2 of the children have been rescued. They were pulled out from the cable car. Authorities have been using helicopters to approach the car, though meeting some hindrances from strong winds. Doctors are at the helipad where they have landed and they are carrying out a medical checkup. Both kids are said to be stable. An official of the scene says they are exploring alternative plans for the rescue. A rope has been laid on both sides of the cable car as a contingency in case the army is unable to extricate the passengers using the helicopters. The rescue is proving very difficult due to the cable car's shape and fragility in the air. The car is set to be hanging from just one side, and the rotor of the helicopter can affect the delicate situation. The 8 people in the cable car were coming from the village of Jangri, and they were headed to Batangi village, and the car had already made 4 trips to and fro before it got stuck. The 8 people have been stuck for at least 10 hours, and we'll definitely be keeping up with that developing story in Pakistan to bring you updates as they come. Let's head to Thailand, where former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra has been brought to prison to serve previous sentences shortly after he returned to the country following his exile in 2008. The 74-year-old appeared briefly with family members at a private jet terminal at Bangkok's Don Muang Airport. Thaksin smiled and waved to hundreds of supporters who turned out to welcome him. He was then escorted into a police convoy waiting outside, heading straight for the Supreme Court after he was taken to prison, where the court says he will serve 8 years. Thaksin's return coincides with the country's general elections. The billionaire figurehead of populist juggernaut Thai party left the country 15 years ago before he was jailed in absentia for abuse of power. This happened 2 years after the military toppled him in a coup, alleging corruption and disloyalty to the powerful monarchy, which he refutes. In the meantime, the country's parliament real estate mogul, Thaksin, became prime minister, paving the way for a new coalition government and an end to weeks of uncertainty and political stalemate. Thrust into the spotlight a few months ago, Shinawatra, part of the populist Thai party, secured the support of more than half of the legislature. He was then declared as the prime minister candidate alongside Petro Thakin Shinawatra, the youngest daughter of former prime minister Thaksin Shinawatra, in the run-up to the May 14 election, in which the party finished second. And staying in Asia, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has said the country will start releasing more than 1 million metric tons of treated radioactive water from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear power plant on Thursday, and that's August the 24th. Speaking after the cabinet meeting, Mr. Kishida said he had asked the Tokyo Electricity Power Company to swiftly prepare to begin the water release, then weather and ocean conditions permitting. The government, he says, is ready to take measures to ensure safety and to provide support to business impacted by the reputational damage stemming from that water release. The water has mostly been used to cool nuclear reactors damaged in 2011 tsunami when waves crashed into the plant on the coast north of Tokyo after an earthquake. But according to governments, the water has been treated to remove most radioactive elements except for tritium, which is an isotope of hydrogen that must be diluted because it is difficult to filter. And what do the Japanese think of this? People in Tokyo have been largely supportive of the government's move. A few of them who spoke to press about it said they are very glad a date has finally been decided and that Prime Minister Kishida has finally visited Fukushima to explain the situation to the local people so that it could happen. They believe it is a big step towards the decommissioning process of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Another thinks release of the water is okay as it has been measured and meets international standard. Another says that many countries have said release of the water is safe, but raised concern of the trouble it poses for fishermen in the area. And indeed, the International Atomic Energy Agency gave the green light to the release of this water in July, saying that it met international standards and that the impact it will have on the people and the environment was negligible. Let's head to neighboring South Korea. It says it sees no problem with the scientific or the technical aspects of the release of the water. The South Korean government said it had been notified by Japan on its decision and believes that Japan will execute the release of the water according to the plan. The administration of South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has faced a fine line over the issue as it seeks to improve relations with Japan, while the risk of a broader consumer backlash persists at home. Well, China, on the other hand, is gravely concerned and says it strongly opposes the release of the Fukushima water. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin described the move as extremely selfish and irresponsible. He told reporters the Japanese government have defied the serious concerns and resolute opposition of the international community and insisted on announcing that the discharge of the contaminated water from Fukushima will begin on the 24th of August. He said China urges Japan to rectify its wrongful decision and withdraw its plan to discharge the nuclear contaminated water into the sea. He also says that Japan will communicate in good faith with its neighbors in a sincere manner. In the meantime, he says that China will take all necessary measures to safeguard the marine environment, food safety, and public health. And reacting to this development, Associate Professor and Director for the Centre for Radiation Research at the University of Adelaide, Australia, Tony Hooker, has said in his views that Japan's plan to release the Fukushima water is safe. Mr. Hooker says that there are treated water releases from other nuclear facilities around the world that currently contain higher levels of tritium than the scheduled Fukushima one. Hooker also highlights the plan's necessary to mitigate the risk of further endangering that are from the potential earthquakes damaging the water storage tanks, and the space is needed to further decommission the plant's existing reactors.
Look, from my perspective, this is safe. It's what nuclear reactors have been doing for decades around the world. We have not seen any environmental or human health effects from these previous tritium releases. And the tritium releases from other nuclear facilities around the world are much, much higher than what the Japanese will release. What we do know from nuclear accidents is that there's a lot of public fear and there's a lot of psychosocial impacts from this fear of radiation. I think with the release and with all of the independent monitoring that will be undertaken, hopefully that will give some consumer confidence that there is no other harmful effects from this radiation. But in saying that, if I took fish from Australia, I will find radioactive isotopes. The sea is naturally radioactive. Yeah, so look, there will be trace elements of other radionuclides, but they're well below any regulatory limit. But tritium is the one that they can't remove, and it's a natural radioactive isotope. You can find it in seawater, and it's a very weak radiogenic isotope. So so it's a really weak beta emitter. It can only penetrate not even 0.6 of a millimeter through material. So, and it decays to nothing else radioactive. One of the biggest issues is that they have 1.3 million tonnes of water on site, so over 1,000 huge water tanks. And so the longer that you keep that water in these tanks also creates more of a hazard, because if there's another earthquake, that water could spill from those tanks and contaminate the area even more. So there is a need to dispose of this water, and they also need space to be able to build buildings to further decommission the reactors that are on site. From a radiation protection, radiation safety perspective, maybe we should be looking at the stress on the ocean, looking into the future. And so this would be an opportunity for all nuclear facilities, all countries around the world to come together and maybe put a research project in to look at alternative methods of tritium disposal.
However, Hong Kong has said it will introduce a ban on some of Japan's seafood imports. The region's lawmakers led a small demonstration strongly opposing the release of the treated radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. Hong Kong's Environment Secretary, Tse Ching-wan, says the ban will cover imported aquatic products from 10 Japanese prefectures, including Fukushima and Tokyo. The measure encompasses live, frozen, refrigerated and dried aquatic products, as well as sea salt and seaweed.
Just now, Japan has announced to discharge the radioactive into the ocean 2 days later. But at the moment, we are still questioning about safety of the whole system. Therefore, we're going to withhold such actions as soon as possible.
Welcome back. Checking in on the wildfires in Greece now, the fire service says they have stumbled on 18 bodies in the forested area north of the country where wildfires have raged for 4 days now. The bodies were found near a hut outside the village of Avantis when the fire brigade inspected the charred remains of the building. Initial reports suggest those who died may have been migrants. A coroner and investigation team are heading to the scene in the Dadia forest. Unconfirmed reports say the bodies were discovered in 2 groups, and there were fears that the number of casualties could increase. The fire service is still investigating this matter. In another development, dozens of hospital patients, many of them the elderly, have been evacuated into a ferry on the Greek port city as wildfires have been raging uncontrollably for the 4th day. 65 patients in the university hospital were evacuated by early this morning, while 14 people were evacuated by a Coast Guard vessel from the beach near the village of Marki. Among those evacuated were also newborn babies, and hundreds of firefighters have been struggling to contain that blaze that broke out in Alexandroupolis on Saturday and quickly spread and fanned by gale force winds, sending plumes of smoke above the city turning the night sky red. One person has been killed in that incident. But overnight, as flames approached another clinic at the premises of Alexandropolis Metropolitan Church Foundation, staff moved patients in wheelchairs and on stretchers into ambulances. Well, it has also been really hot in many countries across Europe this summer, looking two or on some days higher than those normally recorded in the Gulf during the same period. Meteorologists are now using a more holistic measurement called the wet bulb, which is a calculation that accounts not just for air temperature, but also how much moisture it holds. In the UAE, for example, where humidity can often rise to above 50% on any given day, wet bulb measurements recorded were at levels so dangerously high that it sustained long enough could cause serious harm to human health. The UAE Center has been measuring wet bulb temperature levels for over 2 decades now, and Saredi said that there was not much change in averages recorded so far. But global wet bulb measurements higher than 30 carry a risk. When sustained for several hours, people cannot find a way to quickly cool down. That could happen in the near future, as climate change is predicted to affect not just how wet bulb temperatures get, but also how long they persist.
This is the rest.
Over in the United States, U.S. President Joe Biden has spoken about his own history of loss to the people of Maui, whom he visited on Monday. The president remembered the vehicle accident death of his first wife and young daughter. He and other U.S. officials have been criticized for the initial response to Maui fires.
Was difficult. I can only imagine what it's like to lose your home completely, burned to the ground, and more importantly, all the things that matter to you from that ring he gave you when you were 19 years old, from that special letter that came for your son or your daughter, the little things that matter most, the album, the family albums, all of it is a touchstone to all the things we care about and lose. And many of you have lost more than just that. Many of you have lost family, not even sure where some are. I've had a similar experience. I was a young senator being taken care of, not a joke, by Danny Inouye, who was my mentor. I was 29 years old. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in as a senator yet. And by the way, for 36 years, I was listed as the poorest man in Congress, so I didn't get there based on my income. And what happened was, I was down in Washington interviewing for staff. After I was elected on December 18th, before I was sworn in, and I got a phone call from my fire department saying I had to come home immediately. There had been an accident. A tractor trailer had broadsided my wife Christmas shopping with my 3 children. She was killed, my baby was killed, and my 2 boys were thought not to make it initially. So I have a little bit of a sense what it's like driving from Washington to Wilmington, 150 miles, wondering what in God's name is it going to be like when I get to the hospital. Only thing worse than losing someone is not sure whether you've lost someone. Not sure whether. My heart goes out to Jill and I. It aches for you, those of you who are trying to determine whether or not the person who is missing and unaccounted for reasons that are devastating. What I've observed in my short time here today is the courage, the community, the sense of togetherness you have. It's not an ordinary community. It's a community based on faith in one another.
The U.S. has been faced with 3 natural disasters in less than 1 week. This unprecedented occurrences forced emergency management teams to be on the front lines, especially trying to save the lives of those who are disabled amidst these disasters. Our Washington correspondent Maria Byrd interviewed the director of Disability Coordination for the White House, directed Federal Emergency Management Administration.
As to exactly what has occurred now. We're now in the recovery mode, and especially for those who might have not evacuated and might have a disability.
Well, in just about every disaster, one of the biggest risks to the disabled population is the risk of abandonment. And a lot of times that's can be attributed due to the failure to plan, to think through how a person would evacuate who needs accessible transportation. Fortunately, we're not getting reports from the current disasters on that being the case. I think people have so many more resources they can tap in preparation for disasters, such as what we're seeing in places like California and Hawaii.
I know that California right now is the focal point, but we know that Maui was devastated quite severely, and I think that more than what the residents expected. Can you tell us exactly what's happening right now with those who are disabled in that region, especially as you think about the fact that it is an island?
At this point, we're still in life-saving mode. We're still trying to get entire communities informed, get them linked to resources that get them on the path to recovery. So we haven't gotten to the point where we can figure out within those populations who is disabled and who is not. I do know that it was important for us to make connections with local stakeholders. Some of these stakeholders are disability advocates, and so we have a great report going on right now with those in Maui, who are giving us an idea of the type of messaging, the type of areas we need to focus on or emphasize. So we do that in partnership. It's a whole of humanity effort, we like to say. But we couldn't do that alone. So at this point, we're hoping that as people are reunited with loved ones and are thinking through ways to recover and what that looks like in recovery, that we'll begin to address a lot of the issues that are unique to the disabled population. One thing we need to push more of, though, is this specific resource. There's a cap waiver that extends what people with disabilities or households who have a person with a disability can get in terms of resources that replace things like accessible equipment, ramps.
For those who have found themselves by themselves, who are disabled, and maybe, you mentioned a resource, but maybe they don't have a home because it's either been taken down by a fire or it's flooded to the point where they are not able to stay there. What type of resources are available for them? Because at this point, they are almost at the point of homelessness.
What we're looking at prior to a disaster is a situation where we hope that the communities were fairly accessible. We hope the communities abided by disability law, had enough homes that offered accessible living opportunities for people with disabilities, because what happens is these become scarce when a disaster happens, when entire communities are wiped out. And if the community wasn't prepared before the disaster, it just becomes worse after the disaster. So again, we spent a lot of time looking at individual disasters unto themselves and what were parts of the community that had enough accessibility for us to repair to that standard versus communities that weren't accessible. And we somehow have to figure out a way to put people in a different situation that's highly situational. In many cases, some communities do that better than others, but we're here to place an emphasis on preparation being the key to mitigate the risk of abandonment, being prepared, having phone numbers available, having contact with family members who know where you are in case you evacuate, things like that.
As we kind of wrap up a little bit here, one of the things is that we can imagine how stretched you are thin, especially your office with those actual who go on the ground, individuals to be able to go to California and Hawaii. What is the personnel? How are you all able to support both regions with personnel to be able to assist those local governments, as you've mentioned?
Well, this is our sole mission, and we have to be ready. I served in the Marine Corps for 12 years, and I know what it means to appear to be stretched, but there's another gear we have to locate. A lot of these folks have been doing this for a long time. FEMA has plenty of resources to cover current and future disasters. And we stand ready. And what we do is we pay attention to the mental health and wellness of our employees, as well as the people who undergo the impact of the disasters. But it's a human issue, and so we have to take care of each other as human beings, and that remains a constant, whether we have 2 disasters or 20.
And before we close, if you could tell us information of what advice you're giving those who are in these regions at this time, and then those who have loved ones in these regions and are concerned about their safety.
We want people, the storm has passed, but the danger hasn't fully passed yet. So continue to listen. If loved ones are missing, please be patient. Local and state officials are doing their level best to try to connect families if they've been separated. At the end of the day, we're going to be here until we need to take care of everything that needs to be taken care of.
Director Gillums, we thank you so much for joining us. We thank you for sharing the insight as to how you all are supporting those who are disabled in this time of crises, both between Maui and California. So thank you again.
I appreciate the opportunity.
And staying in the United States, but to a different matter now, former President Donald Trump, who has been facing charges of election interference, says that he plans to turn himself in to a court in Georgia. Mr. Trump denies 13 charges, including racketeering and false statements. He and 18 others accused had been previously given until noon on Friday to appear at Fulton County Jail for processing. The sheriff says that they will be treated like any other defendants, which could mean that Mr. Trump will be fingerprinted and his mugshot taken. Before he announced he will surrender on Thursday, the court filing was released that set out the terms of his bond agreement set at $200,000. It read, "The defendant shall perform no act to intimidate any person known to him or her to be co-defendant or witness in this case, or to otherwise obstruct the administration of justice. The above shall include, but are not limited to, posts on social media or reposts of posts made by another individual on social media." Let's bring in Washington correspondent Maria Byrd. Thank you very much, Maria, for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we are hearing that Mr. Trump could be fingerprinted. His mugshot could be taken when he turns himself in on Thursday. He has turned around to turn himself in now, but that doesn't mean he's guilty, does it?
No, this is just, at this time, the DA has said that he's potentially a flight risk. And so he's not willing to pay the bond that would allow for him not to have to turn himself in. And so as a result of that, he's stating that he will turn himself in. He has obviously made various comments about the fact that this is not at all what he believes is the case, and that he will most likely, he believes he will come out of this clean. And so, but he will probably have a mugshot taken, fingerprints taken. This is unprecedented, obviously, even with all the other arraignments that he's had previously and all the charges that have been brought before him previously over the last few months.
Well, what happens after seeing that he could easily pay the bill set at $200,000?
So if he does not pay and they bring the mugshots, I think the question is going to be, is there some sort of time that he's going to be held? That I think is still up for, we won't know until Thursday. I'm sure the DA is preparing herself for what could potentially happen once he turns himself in on Thursday, and what they will have to do if he's not paying the bond of $200,000. So I think we're all sitting here wondering to see how will this really play out, because this is a very different strategy that he's taken than what he took in Washington and obviously New York as well.
But isn't this damaging to Mr. Trump's image? What do party members think about this, and how are things developing so far?
Well, you all have shown images of young children, adults, still looking to take pictures with him, still looking to support him. He's still the leader within the Republican Party for the upcoming 2024 elections. So whether or not his strategy is that he will be able to take this and potentially what he might perceive as negative press and turning it into him, stating that he is innocent, that this is, additional charges being brought against him that's really about the American people and really about not being able to preserve the freedom and justice of America, that potentially could get his base even more riled up and looking to support him even further. So maybe this is a way for him to even gain further support as he looks to clinch the Republican nomination. But that is all barring if he does not find himself convicted and imprisoned for any of these charges that are being brought before him.
And talking about his political race, I mean, if he turns himself in on Thursday, what is expected? What impact will this have on the race for his presidency?
This could potentially help his race because I think that what he's sharing with his base, one of the things that we've seen that's been made clear over the past now almost 8 years or more is that he has built a very strong supporter base. Those supporters will trust and believe him regardless of what obviously has happened. And I think he's put that to the test through New York, through Washington, and now through Fulton County, Georgia, to show that they will support him regardless of what happens as far as what they've said as an indictment. He came out on January the 6th, and there was talks around the fact that he should have won the election, that he did win the election, and that the election was taken from him. And that message has been carried out throughout the last few years since the January 6th attacks.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria Byrd. We'll definitely keep our eyes on that story. Thanks for your time and your contribution on the World's Day. Let's talk about the 15th summit of BRICS nation, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is currently holding in the commercial city of Johannesburg in South Africa. While representatives of 23 countries are attending that event, South Africa's Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Ibrahim Patel, welcomed foreign delegations. Global geopolitics, economic issues, trade and infrastructure development, business opportunities, and the bloc's potential expansion are all expected to be discussed, with BRICS members pushing for economic multipolarity and away from a Western-oriented system.
On behalf of the South African government, I wish to warmly welcome you at this BRICS Business Forum on a beautiful late winter's day. I want to welcome all 1,200 delegates from across South Africa, Brazil, Russia, India and China, as well as many other countries on the African continent. I welcome our distinguished guests, including the President of the New Development Bank, Ms. Dilma Rousseff, and the Minister of Finance of Brazil, Fernando Haddad. I welcome a dear friend, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkele Mene, as well as the Minister of Trade from the Republic of Mozambique. To all of you, a special welcome to this province of Gauteng, the economic powerhouse of the African continent.
Well, attending this year's summit in South Africa is Chinese President Xi Jinping, making his first visit to the country in 5 years. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says that both countries have similar views regarding expansion, and that is something which has always been a goal for China, which hopes that broader membership will lend clout to the grouping already home to 40% of the world's population and a quarter of global GDP. While a potential BRICS enlargement remains one of the things up in the air, the bloc's pledge to become a champion of developing global South and offering an alternative to a world order dominated by wealthy Western nations is already finding resonance. But Chinese President Xi Jinping says that he is ready to work with President Cyril Ramaphosa to expand the strategic partnership to new heights. The Chinese leader is on his fourth state visit to South Africa, which comes ahead of this summit.
Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit takes place within the context of celebrating 25 years of diplomatic relations between South Africa and China, while historic ties dates back to the Bandung Conference of 1955. After a brief welcome ceremony hosted by Ramaphosa, both leaders held a private meeting followed by a signing ceremony and press conference. The two presidents explored more cooperation and collaborations to strengthen the already existing diplomatic and economic ties.
Building on this firm foundation, we should continue to provide each other with mutual support. Over the years, the relationship between our two countries has been steadily strengthened and has transformed into a comprehensive strategic partnership that is underpinned by 10-year strategic programs of cooperation. China and South Africa share common goals of economic growth, development, and common prosperity for our respective countries and for all countries of the global South.
The key to our good relations and the strong bond of friendship is that our two countries and political parties have been sharing real and war of development, connected by a deep bond as comrades and brothers.
Minister of Youth, Women and People with Disability, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, says the state visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping offers hope for the two countries.
Well, it's a very important visit because our diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China this year is marking 25 years. And if we look back to 98, when we started, a lot has been achieved. And those relations have been going stronger, but they still need to grow stronger, especially on the economic cooperation. So this really is very important for us.
According to the South African Revenue Service, China is South Africa's largest trading partner. It accounts for 9.4% of South Africa's exports and 20.2% of South Africa's imports. The two nations will be looking at expanding the BRIC bloc at the 15th BRIC Summit in Johannesburg. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Simos, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. The African Union Peace and Security Council says it has suspended Niger until civil rule is restored in the country. A statement from the council said it requests the AU Commission to undertake an assessment of the economic, social and security implications of deploying a standby force in Niger and report back to council. The AU just last week held a meeting on the crisis against the backdrop of the divergent views within the bloc over any military intervention. The coup has heightened international worries over the Sahel region, which faces growing jihadist insurgencies linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. And staying with Niger, at least 300 supply trucks coming from Burkina Faso have been allowed into the country to provide assistance in the wake of crippling sanctions by ECOWAS and member states on Niger. Already governed by a military junta, Burkina Faso made that move without any obstacles, although there were breakdowns and logistical challenges. And this assistance reportedly arrived at a critical time as the UN's food agency and recently cautioned that the political crisis, the sanctions and the border closures were all negatively impacting the supply of essential goods, including food and medical supplies to Niger.
Why is it so bad?
Elsewhere, 38 survivors from a boat tragedy off Cape Verde have returned to Dakar through a military plane, and this is coming more than 6 weeks after the migrants left Senegal. The survivors are among 101 people who set out for the journey on July the 10th trying to reach Spain's Canary Islands. More than 60 people, mostly Senegalese, are feared dead after their boat drifted at sea for over 1 month. A few inhabitants, including members of the same family, had said that they were relieved knowing that their relatives were on their way back home alive. But Cape Verde officials have called for global action on migration to help to prevent further loss of life. Tomorrow is Zimbabwe's presidential election, and the main opposition party, Citizens Coalition for Change, has held its final rally in the country's capital, Harare, ahead of the upcoming elections tomorrow. While authorities say the Wednesday's election will be a significant step in the country's democratic governance, the civil society groups have expressed concerns that the polls will not be free nor fair.
Thousands of supporters of Zimbabwe's main opposition party, Citizens Coalition for Change, crowd together on Sunday at the party's penultimate rally before the country holds general elections. The CCC is led by presidential candidate Nelson Chamisa, a lawyer and pastor. The current president, ZANU-PF's octogenarian Emerson Mnangagwa, became president in 2018 after a coup ousted former leader Robert Mugabe.
I told SADC that number one, Mr. Mnangagwa is not preparing to win, he's plotting to rig. I told SADC that he stole the election in 2018, but this time I will not accept to allow him to steal the election again.
Meanwhile, the previous day, thousands of supporters gathered in Zimbabwe as President Emerson Mnangagwa gave his final ZANU-PF rally before upcoming elections. Crowds cheered as the leader spoke to crowds at the event about 350 kilometers outside of the capital, Harare.
We need more time for us to build our motherland. Zimbabwe is ready to scale up the implementation of social and economic development for our motherland. We are determined to lift more and more of our people out of poverty into higher quality of life.
Political analysts say young voters who've never known a prosperous Zimbabwe could play a significant role in the election, which takes place on August the 23rd, with 1/6 of the registered electorate being first-time voters.
Spanish acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez today received new Women's World Cup champions La Roja at the Mallorca Palace in Madrid today. Sanchez says the whole world is very proud of the players and that women's sports and soccer in Spain have a bright future ahead. Spain defeated England 1-0, capping off a tournament that has broken attendance and TV records, raising hopes of a surge in interest for women's game. Meanwhile, he addressed the issue of the unsolicited kiss of soccer chief Luis Rubiales on player Jenny Hermoso during the World Cup victory. Sanchez told reporters that his apologies were not enough and asked for more steps to clarify what happened.
Lo primero, presidente, gobierno, venimos a enseñarle y a entregarle.
And finally on the program, under a lot of stress, would you consider being buried alive or relieve it? Well, that is what life coach Svetlana Pilatova is advocating in Leningrad, Russia. You have to understand the therapy is not for the faint-hearted. Burying people alive is a way to cut them off from their surroundings, their work, through any issues of life. People dig graves on the Ladoga riverbank, and men and women bury each other with appropriate breathing apparatus. Well, the whole procedure also takes around 1 hour, although some ask for more, and the longest self-burial has lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. This type of burial therapy has been used in other European and Asian countries.
одной рукой. Ты ножками-то дрыгай. Ну, пусть дрыгай. Достаточно или еще?
Еще. Ну, ноги можно больше.
Ага. Держи. Сейчас. Наваливай это все с одной стороны, с другой стороны.
Well, people and what they believe in. On that note, we end the world today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.